The next example of a piecewise defined function is the absolute value function. Recall that the absolute value of a number a, denoted by absolute value of a, is the distance from a to 0 on the real number line. Distances are always positive or 0. So we have the absolute value of a is greater than or equal to 0 for every number a. So for example, the absolute value of 3, or the distance from 3 to 0, is equal to 3. The absolute value of -3, or the distance from -3 to 0, is 3. The absolute value of 0 is equal to 0. The absolute value of the square root of 2 minus 1 is the distance from the square root of 2 minus 1 to 0, which is equal to the square root of 2 minus 1. The absolute value of 3 minus pi is equal to pi minus 3. So in general, we have the absolute value of a, which is equal to a, if a is greater than or equal to 0. And the absolute value of a is equal to negative a if a is less than 0. Remember that if a is negative, then negative a is going to be positive. So if we want to sketch the graph of the absolute value function f of x, which is equal to the absolute value of x, we first need to put this in a piecewise form. So, using what we have from above, we know that the absolute value of x is going to equal the following. We know it's going to equal x if x is greater than or equal to 0, and it's going to equal negative x if x is less than 0. So if we want to graph this function, that means we're going to have a piecewise function. So let's go ahead and label this. So the first one represents y is equal to x if x is greater than or equal to 0. So that forms a line here where all the values of x are greater than or equal to 0. So that means that this is f of x, which is equal to x when x is greater than or equal to 0. And then the second part is the graph of f of x, which is equal to negative x, which means you're going to have a negative slope for when x is less than 0. So that means you have this graph here that represents f of x, which is equal to negative x when x is less than 0. So therefore, ultimately, what we end up with is a graph that is the shape of a V. So when you have your absolute value, you know you're going to end up getting a V-shaped graph.